Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you're all having a good day. In today's episode, having gotten the Enderman farm set up in the previous episode, we now of course have, whichever chest I put them in, a decent supply of ender pearls. And of course I haven't brought back a full double chest of them back to the overworld yet, but we can always go and grab some more from the farm if we want to. With these, of course, I can make sure that I never run out of ender chests, because with a little blaze powder, we should be able to turn all of these into eyes of ender, and having farmed a bunch of obsidian from the towers in the end dimension before, I should be able to make a handful of ender chests that we can keep either in an ender chest or in my inventory, or at carefully chosen positions throughout the world to make sure that we are never too far away from access to that inventory. And so that's what we're going to focus on today, actually. I want to set my ender chest up a little better, because as you can see right now, it's a mishmash of various things. We've got like a lava bucket and some iron blocks in here. I think these are from a beacon that I installed somewhere, but the lava bucket, I don't know why that's there. I have absolutely no idea. I'm pretty sure that's from when we set up the Enderman farm in the previous episode. I really don't need a lava bucket just hanging out here in my ender chest. And we've obviously got supplies for a bunch more shulker boxes right here. So I've drafted up a list of what I think will be a decent set of shulker boxes that we can put in here and color code to make sure that we always have these shulker boxes on us as long as we have access to an ender chest. The first thing that's going to mean though is tidying some stuff up. Like, I have a couple of boxes of mob drops that I brought back from the mob farm where I've been AFKing for more gunpowder, so I have a decent amount of rotten flesh in here and a decent amount of string, which we can now trade with the villagers upstairs if we want some easy access to emeralds. Naturally, the rotten flesh is all going to be traded to the clerics, and I'm not worried about trading them half a stack at a time because we can easily get more of this. And I believe string can be bought by both the fisherman and the fletcher, although the fisherman doesn't have a string trade yet since we've traded with him relatively infrequently, so I think the Fletcher is going to be our best port of call, also the best deal, since this is a previously zombified and cured villager. So that's freed up another shulker box. We got another one in here that is currently full of golden carrots and spectral arrows, I guess. I think I got those from piglin bartering. So we'll find a place to tuck those away, and this can become our more permanent food box. We are going to be grabbing dyes and color coding each of these, and then we'll arrange them in color order inside of here so that we know what we've got. And I'll clear out the remainder of the stuff in here, because the goal here is to have all 16 colors of shulker boxes used for something, and then the 17th color, which is the natural shulker box color, can populate the bottom row, and those will be temporary shulker boxes that we use for other things. Like if we're grabbing like 8 or 9 shulker boxes of sand from the desert, we can bring those all back and deposit them here. And that will leave us with 3 spots along the side here, which can be used for even more temporary stuff, like if I just want to store some ender chests in there, if I want to put my golden helmet in there so I have easy access to that when I go to the Nether. Maybe if I want to have some spare shulker shells in there, that makes sense, so that we can bust out more shulker boxes anytime we want to. But for now, let's just leave this space blank and let's focus on what each shulker box is going to contain. We've already started with one, and that's basically a staple of every Minecraft series that I do. I need a redstone shulker box, because redstone is one of those things that you need on the fly. There are lots of different components, and a shulker box seems like the ideal place to store them. Of course, now we have so many levels from the Enderman farm and from the Guardian farm, we can now rename all of these, and it'll cost us 1 level each time we do, but we've got plenty of levels to do with that. So let's call this one the redstone box. That way the name will show up above the hotbar when we select it or whenever we hover over it, so it's really obvious what that box is meant to contain, even if we used up all of the content. Naturally, when it comes to the supplies that we want in here, it's going to make sense to keep them in as compact form as possible. So in this case, I'm probably going to bring blocks of redstone with me instead of just raw redstone dust, since each of those is going to be 9 redstone dust, and we can break that down as much as we want to. So I think a sensible thing to do is to bring 2 stacks of redstone blocks. That way we can break them down into dust, and we'll leave an empty space in each of these shulker boxes just in case any leftover supplies need to go there, and if we need a spot for redstone dust, then that can be occupied by any redstone that we can't remake back into blocks of redstone. I think that makes sense. So over here in my storage setup is actually where I've been storing some of the redstone components that I haven't stashed away in this shulker box, but I think we're going to move them to the shulker box more permanently. Only up to a stack of each component though, so we're going to have a stack of droppers in there. I've got 48 dispensers, because dispensers obviously have different uses boxes than droppers, and we'll be crafting a few more of these as we go, provided we have the redstone for them. Remember, at this point we can trade redstone from clerics, so it should be nice and easy to get hold of it without having to go mining, and at short notice we can make things like pistons and redstone lamps and whatnot to stash in here and use for later. I'm going to keep things like rails out of here, even though they are commonly used in redstone contraptions, because one of the other shulker boxes we're going to put together for the ender chest is going to be one based in transport. So we'll have a bunch of the different rail types, some minecarts, some hopper and chest, and potentially even TNT minecarts can go in there. Naturally, there will be some things that we don't want to fit into the redstone box simply because there are so many variants of things like buttons. Although if you want to put something like buttons in here, you might want to consider putting some stone and wood buttons in here separately, since stone buttons will power something for exactly 1 second, while wood buttons are 1.5 seconds of power. So you might actually want to store a couple of these separately, especially if it's a wood type that you can easily craft into buttons in bulk. Slime blocks and honey blocks are going to be essential to have in here. We're also going to have a stack of pistons and a stack of sticky pistons, so I'm going to make those quickly now. And we'll probably want to bring some sculk sensors with us, although calibrated sculk sensors might be worth including as well. Obviously, space is going to come at a premium. After a certain point, it's going to be difficult to squeeze every redstone component into the game in here, so think about what you're going to use regularly and the type of stuff that feels essential to have at short notice in a redstone box, and stuff that might not be easy to acquire if you find yourself in other regions of the world. There are also some redstone components which, despite them being useful for a variety of things, I'm probably not going to include in the redstone shulker box, like daylight detectors, for example. I find that when it comes to redstone contraptions, I don't use them nearly as often as you might expect, and so I'm not going to worry about putting them in my redstone shulker box and have them take up space. I'm going to leave them here in the redstone storage I already had set up, and if I know I'm going to need a lot of daylight detectors for whatever reason, I can always come back here and craft them in bulk. There are definitely some components which I won't be able to craft a full stack of for this episode because it's going to take a lot of time to farm them up, and the target block is one of those. I find these things really useful in some redstone contraptions for redirecting power or even providing a power source, and while I think they would be an ideal addition to my redstone box, I simply need to farm a lot of hay bales in order for that to happen. I could go out and raid villages for hay bales, but I would really prefer to farm them here renewably, and the wheat farm that I have over there by the hill is not quite up to scratch. Likewise, I need to get a decent source of glowstone because I don't have a great deal for crafting redstone lamps right now, and redstone lamps are going to be a really useful thing to have in large quantities here in my redstone box, but we might save that for another day and we'll see if we can get a better source of glowstone. The last thing I think I'm going to consider putting in this redstone box is TNT, which always feels really weird putting some TNT next to redstone components, since the two are obviously going to set each other off if you place them in the world, but they're going to be fine together in this box, and TNT is going to be vital for us later when it comes to slime block contraptions, because when we look into mechanics in future like TNT duplication, TNT and slime are going to go hand in hand. So I think stashing some TNT there for its vital use in redstone contraptions can be a useful strategy. For now, though, I think this is most of the components that I will want to store here in this redstone box, so I'm going to work on building up my supply of them, making sure I have a decent amount of comparators and repeaters, since, especially if we're setting up storage filters and other circuits like that, we're going to need a lot of those. But leaving space in each of these boxes is going to be vital. As I said before, we're going to run into situations in which we'll need to break some redstone blocks down, and we'll have some excess redstone dust that won't get crafted back into a block. We also want to leave a bit of room for future redstone components, things like the crafter, which is going to arrive properly in the full release of Minecraft 1.21. And there are other blocks and items which are technically redstone components but aren't going to fit in a redstone box like this. For example, doors and fence gates can be opened and closed using redstone power. Bells can be rung using redstone power, but they aren't necessarily something I would think of including in this redstone box. Librarians' lecterns can of course be used in tandem with a written book to create redstone power, but that's something that I will probably end up including in a separate shulker box that's focused on villager workstations. So stuff like that and lightning rods and other power components that are a little bit more niche are not going to go in this redstone box, since I doubt I'll need to use them all of the time. But that is the box that I'm probably going to think about the most, since it will have the greatest variety of components in here. Let's take a look at what's going to happen next. I'm going to craft a bunch of chests. We're going to start the orange shulker box, and this one is going to have a little bit more of a simple use. Because when I think of the color orange in Minecraft, one of the first things that springs to mind is lava. We're not going to use this as lava storage, we're going to use this as lava protection, and I'm going to brew a bunch of 8-minute fire resistance potions, and this is going to be my go-to fire resistance potion box whenever I go to the Nether. together. That orangey glow of the fire resist potion is going to match the shulker box perfectly, so I'll know for certain that this is going to be the fire resistance shulker box. We'll do a bit more of the brewing for that between clips, but there we go. Fire resistance box is going in slot number 2. The next box is going to be the yellow one, and this is going to be dedicated to lighting blocks, with yellow just being that nice warm glow that you get from a torch or another lighting source. Naturally, we have a lot of different lighting sources to choose from. We've been farming frog lights slowly throughout the Nether hub area, and we can probably stick a few of those in there once we've acquired them in larger quantities, but I expect we'll want to set up a farm before we put those in this box in the dedicated sense. How much glowstone do I actually have? There you go. Not that much, but it's going to be useful to have items like glowstone, a spare stack of torches, maybe even some shroom lights, which we've been getting in larger quantities from farming warped and crimson wood. When we've done more exploration in the end and started our chorus fruit farm, we can put end rods in here as well, and I think those will be very nice to have around since they're a very different looking light source to a lot of the other block-based ones. Sea lanterns are obviously going to be a great fit for the lighting box. We'll put a bunch of those in there as well, and at some stage when we have farms set up for wither skeleton skulls, we might even consider putting some more unorthodox lighting sources in here, like beacons. Even conduits that help you breathe underwater are also a lighting source, so there's a potential for us to have those around, but I think for now we'll stick with the more mundane options like lanterns. Although this might also be an interesting opportunity for us to introduce soul lanterns to the series, because we haven't really touched on soul fire lighting so far. Soul torches can be made with the regular torch recipe, but with a soul soil block added underneath, and that will produce the same amount of torches as it would do with the regular torch recipe. Those can also be crafted into soul lanterns, as we see the recipe unlock up there, in the same way that you craft regular torches into lanterns by surrounding them with iron nuggets. And the difference between torches and soul torches is a matter of light level. A soul torch will produce a little bit less light than a regular torch will. Look at the difference between these two. Look at the clarity of your surroundings, and you'll see that there is a little bit more dim lighting in the corners here as we place down a soul torch. If I press F3 so that we can see the lighting data here, you'll notice that at the block level, the soul torch is only emitting 10 block light, whereas a regular torch emits 14 block light, which is only one below the maximum block light level of 15. Likewise, lanterns will emit a light level of 15 at the source, whereas soul lanterns actually stick to the same light level as soul torches, a maximum of 10. So that gives you some really versatile options when lighting up structures. Remember, of course, that mobs will only spawn when the light level reaches 0, so if you want to light something with a slightly dimmer light source to make it more atmospheric, you can consider soul lanterns and soul torches. They don't give off a different color of light in-game, despite the blue flame. You'll only see that if you're using something like the Minecraft RTX packs on Bedrock or a real-time path tracing lighting engine applied using the shaders mod that you can find available for Java Edition. But I think each of these will make some really useful additions to our lighting box, because when we think about lighting, we also want to be thinking about atmosphere in creative builds, so those will be a really great thing to have around. Likewise, even though it doesn't necessarily occur as a light source all of the time, stuff like glow lichen, which we've been farming recently over here in this little farming area I set up temporarily next to the melon and pumpkin farm, we can acquire glow lichen in larger quantities, and that will be really useful for subtle lighting and natural lighting in areas where we want our build to be dimly lit. In addition, thanks to the output of our melon and pumpkin farm, jack-o'-lanterns become a very viable light source. Considering all we need to do is shear some of these pumpkins, we can turn those into jack-o'-lanterns using a torch, and they will emit one more block light than a torch will. Just like with the redstone box, we're going to leave a bit of space in here for the future of lighting, because the copper bulb is going to be introduced in Minecraft 1.21, so that gives us at least one more lighting source to think about. And there are some blocks which are technically light sources, even though we don't think of them as light sources, and I won't always consider those for the lighting box unless I really think I'm going to use them strategically. But did you know ender chests actually give off a dim light? I believe they give off light level 7. I believe skulk catalysts and brown mushrooms also give off a light level of 1, so those could be considered for the lighting box as well. But for now, I think I'll just stick to the ones that are meant to be very obviously light sources, and glow lichen can be a fun addition to that list. I think we'll also include candles in here if I have any candles lying around. I've certainly got the honeycomb for it. My honeycomb farm is actually overflowing at this point because I haven't done a great deal with it since establishing it early on in the series. Maybe we'll turn a few stacks of that into a stack of honeycomb blocks, and we'll turn 2 stacks of honeycomb into candles. Certainly got plenty of string available for doing that, so we'll put 2 stacks of candles in there, and we can dye those as we want to. So we'll leave them plain colored for now, and we can dye the candles on site whenever we want them in different colors. My old organic chest in here also provided some glowberries that we picked up from a lush cave a while ago, and I'm going to add those to the shulker box here as well, because those are going to be a really nice natural way of providing lighting to cave environments, and we could also use them for decoration here and there, which is why I'll also split them up with our next shulker box. With the lighting box named the lime shulker box is going to be plants. It's going to include some leaves from various different trees, but it's also going to be things like bamboo shoots, kelp and seagrass where we have those in larger quantities, the glowberries that I just mentioned, probably things like vines as well, and lush cave specific resources like drip leaf. I think drip leaf is going to be a great one to have in here. And as far as leaves go, I want to include some like oak leaves, which will adapt to the different biome colors, but I mostly want to make sure I include some of the ones that don't adapt to different biome colors, since those can allow for a more versatile color palette when we build in biomes where I don't like the biome leaf colors so much. So we can bring some birch leaves, some azalea leaves, some spruce leaves once I'm able to farm some of those, and some flowering cherry leaves as well. On the subject of cherry, of course, we're going to bring some pink petals with us. Those will be added to the selection of flowers that we'll put in here, and we're going to add some of the regular flowers as well, starting with the 2-block tall flowers, because those are easy to reproduce on site. You can just grab some bone meal and bone meal them, which I believe you can't do on Bedrock Edition, but on Bedrock Edition you can bone meal the smaller plants, so your mileage may vary on which plants you actually want to include in this. If you want to include some nether foliage, of course we could do that too. We could bring some crimson roots and warped sprouts with us. I think mangrove roots would make an interesting addition to this box as well. This would also be a great opportunity to have somewhere to stash away the pitcher plants and torch flowers that our friends the sniffers have been digging up for us. You might even want to consider putting some red and brown mushrooms in here, although at this point this box is starting to become a little crowded. But I think in terms of adding some life to builds once you've established them, having some leaves, grass, and other bits and pieces around is fairly essential. A lot of the time you'll be building on grass, so you can just spam bone meal around the place if you want to grow a few flowers and some tall grass, but it is nice to add some variety, and having stuff like pink petals or drip leaf outside of a build can really make it stand out compared to the naturally grown foliage of the biome. So that's why the plant box is going to become a permanent addition to our ender chest. It also ties in neatly with that lime green color. Now, something that doesn't tie in with the green color, but something I plan to include in my ender chest anyway, is a record collection. And here in my precious materials storage back in the house, I've actually got a decent amount of music discs already. A lot of these will be salvaged from specific locations, like trail ruins in the case of the relic disc. Other side can be acquired from ancient cities, dungeons, and strongholds. Ancient cities are also where you'll find the fragments that make up Music Disc 5, and of course Pigstep we have a couple of copies of from raiding Piglin Bastions. 2 of the other music discs can be found as treasure. You'll find both Cat and 13 in dungeon chests and a few other places throughout the world. But one of the reasons I'm planning on including the music disc collection as part of our collection of shulker boxes is that sometimes you'll acquire them almost by accident. As you're navigating caves, you'll occasionally run across a creeper and a skeleton together, and if the skeleton shooting the arrow gets the final killing blow on that creeper, instead of just dropping the gunpowder that they'd normally drop, the creeper will drop a music disc. I'm pretty sure this has already happened to me a couple of times throughout this series, although I don't recall exactly where I left the music discs. They might be in some of these chests around here, but either way, I think it's going to be a good thing to have this music collection on us and keep it handy just in case we want to listen to any of the discs. But music discs are also non-stackable items, and having some place to stash them in the meantime will mean they don't clutter up your inventory while you're exploring the world. The next shulker box is one I will definitely recommend having, and that's a backup equipment box. Just in case you happen to lose your inventory whilst you're out exploring, if you end up dying, or if you just want somewhere to put any useful tools that you don't want cluttering up your inventory at that particular moment, having a backup equipment box is a pretty essential one. I like to carry 2 pickaxes with me at all times, but some people might want to stash the Fortune or the Silk Touch in there depending on what they're using, and of course it's good to have backup and burner equipment just in case you need it for other bits and pieces. This is where I keep my shears, this is where I keep hoes when I'm not using them for taking down trees and leaves and whatnot. I have the 2 different types of crossbow in here, the quick charge, piercing, and multi-shot crossbows. I've also got my netherite chest plate in here, which I don't use because the majority of the time I'm wearing my elytra, and I've got a couple of other bits and pieces of diamond gear in here that has some decent enchantments on it, but for whatever reason became too expensive to repair or just wasn't what I needed at the time. I've got my backup elytra in here just in case I need to fly back to anywhere to recover my equipment. I've got a brush and a spyglass in here, which are circumstantial tools you're not going to use all the time. I think the only thing I'm going to take out of this box is the turtle eggs, since I don't see those being vital equipment anytime soon. But the backup gearbox is going to be a very, very useful one to have around, so that's going in the cyan shulker box slot here in the ender chest. Now this next box is going to be one that you can choose to use a couple of different ways. The light blue shulker box is one that I'll recommend on servers using effectively as a wallet. A lot of the time on multiplayer servers you'll find players using diamonds and other precious resources as currency. So if you wanted to, light blue seems like the perfect color to store a bunch of diamonds in. That way you have a free supply of diamonds in your ender chest that you can take out and pay for any goods in your server's shopping areas. Here in a single player world though, and with my backup gear shulker box having plenty of diamond equipment in, I don't honestly see myself using this box for valuable resources all that much. I could fill it up with other things like iron blocks, which we might use in greater quantities later in the series, but we're going to have a decent amount of those stored in a box which is going to contain a beacon later. So with this light blue box kind of a free agent right now, I think one of the things I'm going to use it for is storing dyes. I think there are plenty of circumstances in which I will need dye later, especially in the case of that lighting box where I said we're stashing a couple of candles to have those in different colors later. So I need to work on my collection of dyes, and we'll probably set up some flower farms and different dye farms shortly in the series, just so that we can have a decent supply of these to keep with us. But the need to dye things is going to be relatively common if we want to have like wool of different colors or dye different beds or any of the other stuff, glass for example. We could keep some dyes in here along with neutral colors of each of the materials that we can dye different colors, like wool and glass and so forth. Right now the dyes I have in the largest quantities are red from all of the poppies from the iron farm and white from all of the bones that I've got from my various skeleton farms. So we can obviously combine those to make loads of pink dye if we want to. It's also now possible to farm lapis from the cleric villages that are up there, so I can very easily acquire blue dyes. Of course we can get hold of magenta that way as well, so we've got a pretty decent supply of most of these dyes by this point, and I think just stashing one stack of each color in here is going to be useful for the future. So for now we will officially name this the dye box, but remember that can always be the wallet if you're using it in a multiplayer context. We're going to finish up the first row with a nice easy one. This one is going to be similar to the fire resistance box because it's going to help us with water breathing. We're going to stash mostly water breathing potions of an 8-minute duration in here. I might throw in a couple of night vision potions just for the sake of it, but of course the other place we can get water breathing from very easily is a conduit, and so I'm going to stash the conduit in this box along with a decent amount of prismarine that will allow us to set up the conduit's outer frame. And with that we will have infinite access to water breathing and night vision type effects through the conduit power, and we can bring water breathing potions along with us for anywhere we don't want to set up the conduit more permanently or anywhere we might swim out of range. So once again I'm going to brew up some water breathing potions, and then we'll move on to the second row of our ender chest. The second row of this is going to be a bunch of stuff that we already have in fairly large quantities, but things that I think are indispensable to the survival experience. Number one, of course, being food. Mostly I'm eating golden carrots these days. They're buyable from farmers, and they have the highest saturation in the games. Saturation being that behind-the-scenes value that determines how quickly you get hungry, which is a really important thing in terms of food conservation. So this is going to be our food box, and we're going to dye it pink. And the reason for that is just because it's the next color in the sequence, but also because a lot of the raw meat in the game is this kind of pink color, and so maybe you remember that that's associated with food. It's not exactly the best link in the world, but hey, at least we have a food box in here now. We're going to dye our next box magenta, and this one is going to be a bit of a curveball. This one is going to feature a lot of the villager workstations that we can acquire, and we're going to grab composters. I'm going to bring a couple of crafting tables and stuff, even though they are not technically speaking villager workstations, but we're going to dedicate the majority of this to villagers. And if you want the justification for the color of this one, it's because we started over here with the clerics, and because the magenta is the same sort of color as the cleric's robes. Now, villager workstations are not just for villagers, they are of course a vital resource for the player as well, and lecterns can be usable in redstone contraptions, as can cauldrons. Even composters can be used in redstone contraptions. Similar to cauldrons, you can take a comparator readout of them and it will display a different signal depending on how full the composter or the cauldron is. So it's a good idea to have these around since they're not going to be squeezed into the redstone box, but they can also be used in the context of villagers. Likewise, a stone cutter is going to be vital for building, so it's good to have one of those around, but you don't necessarily want that gumming up some of the other vital components of your ender chest, and so having it here in a villager workstation box alongside a lot of the others makes perfect sense. It's also a good thing to have if you happen across another village out there in the wild and want to do some quick trading, but they don't have the relevant villager workstations present in that village. You can always just open up your box, pop down a lectern, and trade with the nearest librarian if you want to get a quick mending book to put on a trident or something that you've gotten while you're adventuring. Having recently used a lot of villager workstations to put up there with the villagers in the trading hall, I don't have a great deal of them going spare, so I might just craft a few more things like Fletcher workstations, cartography tables, that kind of thing. And some of those won't be super useful to the player on the fly, but like I said, focusing this box on village management is going to be a great move. If you're considering that nomadic lifestyle where you're traveling around and setting up a new base in a village, you might also want to consider bringing along some bookshelves and an enchanting table. Since the villager workstation box is already going to contain a grindstone, you'll be able to grind off the enchantments for anything you buy from toolsmiths and then re-enchant them using an enchanting setup. So I think having one of those in here is not going to take up too much space, and it's going to make plenty of sense if you're starting a new base somewhere else. I'll work on crafting a few more of those villager workstations later, but for now we can call this the village box. And we'll move on to our next box, the purple box, which, simply put, is just going to be filled with obsidian. And the reasons for bringing a full box of obsidian around with you should be relatively plain, but consider the amount of times we'll need to set up nether portals to biomes elsewhere in the world, and as we establish our nether hub and connect to other regions of the world, we'll need to match those portals, so we'll really need to be building 2 sets of portals for each location. My preferred way of getting hold of obsidian is to go out into the end and just mine out one of the obsidian pillars that respawn whenever you resummon the dragon, so we can get a renewable amount of obsidian that way. There are also more advanced obsidian farms using the wither, which we can set up later on, but just for the purposes of establishing nether portals, which can even be used in some farm designs, I think it's going to be vital to have a large supply of obsidian. Now, if you really want to go full galaxy brain on this, you could do what I suggested earlier and use some of our fresh supply of renewable ender pearls to craft the obsidian into ender chests. All it's going to take is a little extra blaze powder, and we can throw this down, take 2 stacks of obsidian, and turn all of those into 16 ender chests. Then we can stash the ender chests in this shulker box, and every time we break one of those with a non-silk touch pickaxe, as I'll demonstrate right now, let's break it with the fortune pickaxe, you're going to lose the eye of ender, but you're going to turn that back into 8 obsidian. So by storing the obsidian in here as ender chests, you can actually fit 8 times the amount of obsidian into the space of a single shulker box. This can also be a great place to stash an additional supply of ender chests, just to make sure that you've got those available to yourself if you want to break one out and place it in a new base. And that was something I was considering leaving in the empty spaces of the ender chest down the side here, but I think we'll leave them in the obsidian box for now. And from our obsidian box, we'll move on to the beacon box. At a certain point in the game, it's going to be trivial to bring a beacon around with us, and it's going to make sense to bring a lot of iron blocks along with it so that we can set up a beacon base anywhere we want to. Right now I have a beacon set up here in the center of my storage room, and this is probably the one that I would take with me, but I do have a couple of other beacons established elsewhere in the world. There are 2 over at the Guardian farm, and I believe I have left one at my most recent strip mine project over near the slime farm. So if we wanted to, we could go and reclaim one of those beacons and add it to this box, or we could just do another wither fight and add another beacon to the supply here. But I think eventually we're going to have enough beacons that we can stash them here in a shulker box, and the white shulker box makes the most sense to me because the beacon beam is mostly white. So that's going to be our beacon box. We'll leave that in the white shulker box position here. The grey shulker box is already taken up with firework rockets, and that's of course because of the association with gunpowder. Having a firework box is going to make a great deal of sense. You don't need to just stash pre-crafted fireworks in here, of course. It will actually save you space if you stash a bunch of gunpowder and paper in here, since each stack of gunpowder and paper is going to combine to make 3 stacks of rockets. But that's also going to depend on the flight duration you prefer to fly with. It's going to take 3 gunpowder and 1 paper to make flight duration 3 rockets. I prefer to fly with flight duration 1, but to each their own, of course. But we've skipped over one there. We need to talk about the light grey shulker box. That one's going to go in between the white and the grey, and this one is going to be more of a general utility toolbox. Not necessarily for tools like pickaxes and whatnot, but for the utilities, the things that you can never really leave behind as you go exploring. Things like a couple of stacks of wood, for example. Wood is going to be useful basically anywhere you go. If you don't have a crafting table, you can't really make anything. And even when you're mining, you'll probably want a crafting table around so that you can convert raw resources into full storage blocks to save on inventory space. So I'm going to leave a couple of stacks of wood in here. I'm going to leave a couple of stacks of cobblestone in here as well, because sometimes you'll need to cook stuff on the fly, which will involve crafting furnaces when you didn't bring one with you. I think also having a couple of spare stacks of iron in here is going to make a great deal of sense. We got plenty of that from the iron farms, so keeping that around will allow us to craft things like hoppers and additional iron stuff on the fly. Oh, that's something I haven't put in the redstone box, actually. We should really add hoppers to the redstone box. There we go, thinking about stuff like this on the fly, but there's always going to be one or two things you forget, which is why it's important to leave a little bit of space for additional components to be added later. I think coal is going to be a really good one to stash in the utility box as well, because you always need fuel, especially if you're putting together furnaces and whatnot, and I think coal is one of those things that you can run out of without really realizing it. Until you're down in deep slate levels, you're not sure how to get back up into levels that will generate coal, and you need more supplies for torches. So I think coal is going to be a great idea to have in this utility box. I've got plenty of coal ore that I've silk touched throughout the series, so I'll break some of this down into coal now, and that way we can make sure that we add that into the utility box. Outside of that, though, I'm not certain exactly what else I will put in here for the moment. We'll probably add in some boats and things like that, but the next box I add is going to be a transport one that's going to focus on minecart travel, so we'll probably have a couple of boats in there as well. And if you can think of anything else to add to this utility box, let me know in the comments, because I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on what you consider essential as you're traveling. Perhaps we could even move in some of the less important tools from my backup toolbox, like brushes, flint and steel, the spyglass. Things like that could go in the utility box since they are more circumstantial when you will need them. Gosh, it's so good to see the ender chest looking a lot more organized. We got 2 more boxes to go. I'm going to quickly craft up a couple more chests because we're going to need the transport box that I just mentioned, and that's going to feature a lot of the stuff that I've been stashing in here. We're probably going to bring 9 stacks of minecart rail with us. Just fill up that first row with minecart rail, and we'll need to craft a bunch of powered rails since those are probably the second most important. But we'll craft up some detector rails and some activator rails, which I don't use all the time, but they are useful for a couple of different minecart contraptions. I honestly think bringing ladders in here makes sense, and they look so similar to rails that I also like including them in setups like this. But we're also going to have a bunch of boats and minecarts and things like that in here that are going to provide those much needed transport options, not just for the player, but for mobs as well. Think about the times we've had to move villagers around, and it's been so much easier putting them in a minecart or a boat. Likewise, the allays that we trap over there in the Alazy River. We've got 1 chest minecart in there already, but the other types of minecarts we can probably craft as we go, since leaving them as regular minecarts allows you to be more versatile with them, but once they've been crafted into minecarts with other things in them, you can't uncraft them anymore. We're going to dye this transport box black. I don't really have a great deal of black dye, so I think in the near future we'll also have to set up a squid farm or a wither rose farm as well. But that is going to be our transport box, which means that the final box in here is going to be reserved for brown, and that, I think, is going to be dirt and grass. I've acquired so much dirt through terraforming in this series. Naturally, you're going to get a ton of it whilst you're digging around underground, as well as shaping the landscape on the surface, so it makes perfect sense to me to include a bunch of dirt in here, and also some grass to spread to that dirt when we need it. I've been using a lot of grass to terraform the floating island recently, so I don't have a huge amount of it right now, but a couple of minutes with a silk touch shovel we'll be able to get plenty of grass. And if we wanted to, we could also include some of the other dirt variants like podzol, rooted dirt, coarse dirt, and use that as a general landscaping box. So we're going to dye this one brown, rename it the landscaping box, and that is the contents of our ender chest all figured out. So as it stands right now, that's our ender chest. We've got our redstone box, fire resistance, lighting, plants, jukebox right there. We've got the backup gearbox, dye, water breathing, and then on the second row we have food, villagers, obsidian, and our backup ender chest. We've got the beacon box right there, our utility box full of miscellaneous odds and ends that are going to be essential to restarting Minecraft anywhere we end up, the firework box there, a transport box full of rails and minecarts, and our landscaping box full of dirt, grass, and whatever else we want to throw in there. I'm going to craft a bunch more shulkers. These are going to go in the bottom row here, and these are all going to stay this default light purple color so that we can use those for miscellaneous resource gathering and transporting other materials that don't fit into these major categories. As for what we're going to leave down the side here, maybe the scaffolding and the golden helmet can get tucked in there. Maybe we'll leave a spot or two open if we want to, but I'm going to turn things over to you and ask, What do you think I've missed? I've definitely labored to come up with a category that fits every color of Shulker Box today, but some of those I feel like could be replaced with other things depending on what you folks think is vital for restarting the game anywhere we end up, or vital resources to bring along if we feel like larger projects would demand them. I'm thinking maybe tree saplings or something like that could have a place in there, but I'm not sure exactly where to put them, so we'd love your input on this one, folks. In the meantime, though, thank you so much for watching this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you folks soon. Take care, bye for now.